Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm here with Trevor Kerr from MANVSMACHINE. We're about to release, or if maybe it's already been released, a fantastic new training product called the Greyscalegorilla Guide to Redshift, which Trevor has been working on for quite some time, sort of breaking
hmm
down every juicy bit of Redshift, including laying out videos of almost like I want to feel like we covered like every aspect, every feature. Is that
Yeah,
true?
just about. Very close. I mean, it's we've been working on it for months, so new features come and stuff like that. So there may be some things here and there, that we
Yeah.
didn't quite touch on, but it's like I can confidently say at least like 93% of the buttons in Redshift are talked about.
That's a good button ratio, I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Plus, we also did. I think we do 3 projects. So Trevor does 2 projects on his
hmm
own, and as a bonus, I had done this entire video series of myself going through a product render of mine, a client of mine, and captured myself doing from concept to creation this project, and it's all inside of this training. You're going to get to learn a lot about both Trevor and I's approach to Redshift and approach, I think, just to sort of rendering in general, which is something that
hmm
you and I have talked about for years now. We've always talked to each other about our techniques and how we like to approach rendering.
hmm
And Redshift has been a really huge part of my workflow over the past, I'd say, probably since its beta, probably.
hmm Oh
And
yeah.
you guys have been using it at Man versus Machine for a while, right? Can you explain
hmm
how that works? Like how you guys picked Redshift to be the renderer of choice, or is it you still use a mix, right?
Yeah, I mean, we use Arnold, Octane, and Redshift, so we use the trio for sure. But I feel like we end up using Redshift somewhat dominantly. Yeah, it's. I mean, when I came in, a bit over a year ago, we were already using all three of them, and I noticed kind of a bit of a prominence in Redshift because you're able to do your like pitch frames and all that kind of stuff with it because it's like super fast. But it also has a lot of the kind of like production features that you want for when you move those frames into production. And like sometimes you're not actually doing a lot of work to get it from what you had as style frames over into production. Whereas I would say maybe Arnold's a bit slower to get some frames out, and then but it's awesome in the production phase. In
Mhm.
fact, it's killer in the production phase. Octane's incredible for the pitching and development, look development, but then you move over into production. You tend to have like reliability issues, stuff like that. Um, but Redshift kind of nicely hits the middle of all of that through the process. So I think we find that we end up gravitating towards that pretty often. Um, also we use Houdini as well alongside Cinema 4D, and there's an extension for that as well. So in Houdini.
How important has that been to be able to? Because I've heard this from other people as well, the ability to sort of have one experience in a render that can sort of like go between like Cinema and Houdini, even Maya. Is it
hmm
pretty much the same experience in Redshift across the different platforms?
Mostly, yeah. I don't have a ton of experience with Maya and Redshift, but I can say, I mean, like 98% of the buttons are the same between C40 and Houdini. And as well, you can use, the RS text. No, wait, the RS files, the proxy
Yeah,
files,
yeah, the RS
to pass back
proxies.
and back and forth, which is pretty nice. But yeah, I would say the experience is like mostly the same. The biggest differences come in passing off things like the way one application handles instancing, for example, compared to another. So you'll find some differences there for sure. But otherwise, it's pretty one-to-one. In fact, if you're trying to learn a new piece of software, it's pretty nice already having a render engine that you're comfortable with, because then at least you've got some common ground. So when you like try to go learn, for example, if you want to go learn Houdini and Redshift, your license extends over to Houdini, so you already know how to use a render engine in Houdini. And at that point, you're learning more of what I think people spend a lot of time with in Houdini, which is the actual geometry and handlings of all those kind of things. And you've already got like that firm ground,
that foundation
on the render engine. So
yeah, that's cool.
Which is pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean that alone, I love how a lot of these renders kind of span into other DCCs so that you can sort of like use them in more than one place. So as far as like the stuff that you're covering in your parts of the training, what do you think are some? Oh, there's Loki.
It is.
I hear him.
I moved my chair and he thought it was the door.
I love. For those of you at home, Trevor has an amazing dog named Loki, who I wish was my dog. I think I love Loki more than you do. Maybe not. I don't want to say that.
I sense that you want to see him.
I do. Is he nearby?
He is. Come here, buddy. Loki,
let's give the audience, for those of you watching, you're about to see an awesomely cute dog. For those of you listening, you'll just have to imagine Loki.
What's going on up there?
Loki, I miss you, buddy. That's awesome. He's such a good boy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so for people that are looking to learn more about Redshift, I think I know what people are going to get from this course, but I want to hear you talk about like what do you think people are going to get from this training, as opposed to maybe other training that's out there or just random YouTube tutorials.
Well, so like we were talking about before, we kind of brush over everything in Redshift, like every feature, most nodes, for example, in the that are available in the shader graph. And I actually set up scenes for each of the sections, I guess. So that I could like best represent or best show exactly what we're talking about. Sorry, Loki's being like really needy at this moment.
Yeah, one of my favorite, I think, parts in there. Well, there's lots of juicy bits of stuff that you've done, but when you go in the index section, Trevor goes over almost like every node in Redshift, and it was sort of a real eye-opening experience for me watching you cover things like the bump node and even things like just in general. I think you covered like some sampling stuff where you go over some real like sort of rendering topics, really, where you talk about like path tracing, and you did a little bit to sort of explain this, but you do it in like a really short, concise way where it's not like, I didn't feel at all like, oh man, this is going to be an hour of render theory.
Right.
But it's done in a good way where I feel like, okay, I have a little bit more knowledge now than I did before, and it helps me understand that setting or maybe that feature a little bit more. Why do you think that sort of level of instruction is important rather than just like showing, oh, here's the button to hit?
Right. Well, so to your point, I do actually cover a number of like topics and ideas that are specific to Redshift, but they're also, just ideas about rendering in general and how, I guess concepts that you want to know about rendering that will carry over to other render engines as well. Because when you know those fundamentals, and now Loki's drinking water as I'm trying to explain this. Got enough there, buddy. I think knowing that about those ideas helps you actually make decisions about what you're doing, or like if you have a problem and you need to troubleshoot something, you actually understand what's going on under the hood in a lot of cases, which can help you solve problems or just achieve a look that you're trying to get, and stuff like that. And I think the community as a whole, the more discussion that happens about like what is actually happening in the rendering environment, you know, I think that'll be a good thing.
No, I totally agree. I think a lot of times it's not until you sort of have an understanding of a feature or a concept that you're not really fully utilizing it, I think, and you're not able to really, not that you need to have some like deep scientific knowledge of because I certainly don't, but knowing exactly like, you know, what a race switch does and like things like that are like really important because you never know when a production issue is going to come up and one of these things might be used to solve it. But yeah,
Well,
I enjoyed the there was several parts in your instruction where I was kind of like, oh whoa, okay, so that's really interesting. And one of the, I guess, big takeaways for me is that you need to sort of have, and that's why we made this training, to be honest, because sometimes the manual isn't quite enough. Not that like and plus, you know, a manual is like, it's great and you can dive into it. But like me, I'm a visual learner. Like I don't like when I read something. Sometimes I just completely zone out and I just forget what I read like 2 seconds ago. But if I watch something and I watch somebody do it, it's like sticks in my head more. Like I'm able to like retain it and like visualize it in a deeper way, which is what I love about this training, going through all the settings and then getting to see you like traverse a project and sort of take some of that information and put it to use. What's your favorite, if you had to pick like your favorite Redshift features, like what are some of the things that you're constantly reaching for in terms of like either techniques or nodes, or what's your go-to, what's your favorites?
Is this things that I go to, or is it things that are my favorite because of what they are?
Well, I guess
Or do you want to give it one of both?
a better question might be like, what Redshift node feature or just differentiating factor makes
Okay.
you sort of like, oh, okay, this is cool. I like how this works. I'm gonna do this again or use this again.
Well, so something that's actually pretty awesome about Redshift and is actually unique to Redshift at current is you can bring Espresso into the shader graph.
Yeah, that
Like
is very cool.
that's actually quite awesome because it allows you to pass, like, so I'm gonna get into a little bit of a technical talk. Like if we're evaluating values per pixel, right? Like across a geometry. It's easier to pass that kind of information off rather than need to the render engine than needing to like stick it out to user data and then pull that user data in. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
Yep.
so that's actually really, really quite cool. And we talk about that in a couple of the sections, particularly the state node section. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also, you also explained ambient occlusion,
Oh,
which
yes.
which was really interesting because I think that's one of those concepts that I think a lot of people are sort of aware of, and myself included. But I didn't really understand the sort of the technical part of it. So that little bit of you explaining that was like, oh, so that if I just adjust that setting, I'm gonna be able to control the way this falls off more, which I thought was really really cool.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, and myself included, when getting into rendering, you're like, okay, cool, drop in AO or flip AO on or whatever, and you're like, this kind of looks like a certain thing is going on. Like it kind of looks like I've got a sphere around my scene that's like lighting it, or like that all the surfaces are trying to find a sky. Like, you've got like a phrase or like maybe an image concept about how it's working. And that's kind of the level that we stop at for a lot of the features in render engines across the board. So I think being able to take that concept and turn it into like actual knowledge about what's actually going on again, like I said before, it helps you solve problems creatively. Like if I don't know, I can't think of like perfectly a particular example, but it allows you to expand your lexicon of knowledge about 3D in general, because again, they're principles that don't just apply to Redshift right here in the AO shader. Like that's typically how AO is handled,
By
at
everyone,
large.
right? Yeah. So like the idea of like understanding, yeah, because AO is sort of ubiquitous, and I mean, there's different renderers have a slightly probably different approach to it, but the concept of it is sound. So if you sort of understand, okay, well that means this and this means that, then yeah, AO now now you understand how to control it in physical, Arnold, Redshift, whatever, and
Yeah.
you at least have that knowledge going forward, which I think is crucial. I think for people to not only know what it looks like, because I think that's important from a design perspective, to be able to understand like, oh, I need this look. I know I can use this tool to capture this look, but to have that just slightly deeper level to be able to say, I know I want this look and I can tweak this look to what I want it to look like. And that sort of helps a ton. But yeah, that's cool. So as far as Redshift goes, like obviously people love it for its speed and its production. I personally like it for two reasons. Its speed is probably the biggest reason that I love it. The second one being that I actually like the fact that it's biased. Now people throw that word around a lot, like biased, unbiased, and whatnot.
Right.
So I want you to right here just explain explain
Okay.
just in the most simple terms you can. Explain how Redshift is a biased renderer and what that means comparatively to, let's say, Octane or something like that.
Okay. Well, maybe
And the benefits,
simplest,
I guess, if you think there are benefits.
I think the simplest example is probably talking about a case. And I think the easiest case to think about would be GI. Um, stop me if I like start getting too technical.
If I start
basically...
like, if you see me like slouch over in my chair and like start to doze off, I'll poke you. But yeah,
Right.
keep it give me like the Cliff Notes version.
The Cliff Notes version. Many render engines will use just default to brute force approaches to GI. Octane does this. It fires a path array that it just traces that ray and then says, okay, cool, that's what I got as the result.
And that's that ray is coming from the camera.
Yes, fired from the camera through the image plane. Anyway, so Arnold does something similar. It uses a brute force GI approach. There's no like switch for turning GI off. It's just there. So those both send rays from the camera into the scene and then bounce around a bunch to figure out how bright things should be based off of what lights have been found. And those are the only options that you have, more or less. Octane has the direct lighting option, which has some kind of voodoo thing going on there that I'm not sure about. But anyway,
I don't think anybody's really sure about what that actually is doing.
But anyway, Redshift also has a brute force approach, but it also lets you use other approaches that have been, discovered over the course of computer science and computer graphics computing. So, for example, like instead of sending a bunch of rays through the camera and just letting them go do their thing and like returning the result, you can scatter a bunch of points all over your scene based off of what the camera can see, just the stuff the camera can see. And then we'll fire rays from only those points. And then when we need to figure out what the GI is at a certain point in the scene, we just find the closest point and say like, okay, cool, based off of this closest point and this other closest point, we'll figure out that it should be about this bright or this color value should be returned. So
So it's an approximation, really.
it's
It's sort of
hugely approximated, and you can control how approximated it is. You can control the density of those points, for example. And the denser that this point cloud is, the better result you're going to get. It's also going to take a lot longer, but you're often able to leverage that against a brute force approach, which might take a lot longer to clean up something that you feel like should take not too long to clean up, like maybe a cyc or a big smooth surface. Depending on what's going on in the scene, that actually might take a bit of time to more rays or more samples to converge without grain.
To get
Whereas, yeah, exactly. So whereas if you can go and do like a point sampled approach, we'll get that smooth surface really quickly compared to like the brute force approach. So being able to have those options, is really good, actually, I feel like, because
I agree, man.
Yeah.
Because in production, like there's just some times when you don't, you just need to get it done, and you just don't need that like absolute perfect simulation of light, and that's where a combination approach of brute force irradiance point caching can like be really good. I think that's a trade-off that I often talk to people that want to learn Redshift. Is they're always like, well, I heard that there's a lot of settings, there's a lot of knobs to fiddle, and I always try to like tell everyone like, well, nothing in life is free. Like there's a cost to everything. There's a balance to everything. So if fast renders are what you're after, and the cost of that is having to optimize your scene or choose where you're putting your samples, as opposed to just like throw a bunch of compute power at it and wait. Like that's really the game, right? Like you have to sort of play this game of like, well, I'm gonna have more knobs to sort of mess with and have to like spend time tweaking, but I'm gonna get a faster render in the end.
Well, I think there's actually an important distinction there. I don't think that it's necessarily how there are more knobs to tweak. It's that one needs to first understand the knobs to tweak them. And that is a bit of something you got to deal with. You got to go in and learn what they do and why they are optimizations and how they work, so that then you can apply it to different circumstances. And I think that's probably kind of an inhibitor. For example, maybe not an inhibitor, but like something that if I'm looking at Redshift and I'm looking at Octane and I go like, oh cool, I can like slide some stuff around and it looks fantastic, and then I'm good, there's my pitch deck, good to go. Versus Redshift, and I'm like, okay, cool, I know I'm gonna put my lights in and set my shaders up and stuff, but then there's like this other stuff I got to do, and I'm gonna have to figure it out. So I'm just gonna go with what I know for now, because time, whatever, timeline, schedules, stuff like that.
Damn schedules.
I think it's more about the ramp up of learning than it is necessarily that there are more knobs to tweak, because I think once you know the knobs and what they do, you're pretty effortlessly moving through the same tasks that you would otherwise with another engine that has less knobs, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like once you kind of, and that's where this course I think is going to be great for people, because they're going to really understand what things are and what they mean. They'll be able to sort of get up to speed a lot faster. I've talked to a lot of people that have bounced around between renderers and either were thinking about coming to Redshift or have already moved to Redshift. I see a lot of people moving to Redshift these days, it feels like. What do you think, in your opinion, have you come across any like misconceptions about people thinking Redshift does something or works a certain way when it really doesn't? I've run into people saying that they don't think that Redshift can achieve the same look as some of the other renderers, and I always argue like, well, I think it can, just like anything else. You can get a good look. You can get a good look out of physical if you have enough time and enough energy. But oftentimes, I think it's comes down to them maybe not having that full understanding of how it works.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, I mean, I think if you set up three identical scenes and compared render engines side by side, they are going to.
Which we've done with Lightkit
Yeah,
Pro, by the way.
there you go. They are ultimately going to look different because it's just a ton of variation in math and code that's happening. But they can be made to look the same, as you've said. I will say I think that some will achieve effects more effectively than others. Um, you know, and you can do some things that might, in one render engine, that might be expensive in another render engine, but it's like cheap in this one. By cheap, I'm talking about like render budget,
Right.
So yeah, I think, where am I trying to go with that?
I think you took yourself off track a little bit.
I did.
Well,
I did.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, did you remember? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think you're probably never gonna get like a 100% match to match across different render engines. Like I said, because there's just too much variation. Like it's different teams of people writing different lines of code.
Right.
But if you say like, make me a warm looking scene with this product in it, like you're going to be able to do that in any of the render engines. And again, it just comes down to how efficiently and how well each render engine performs certain tasks. Like if subsurface is better in one, I think we know who we're talking about here.
Anybody that's implemented random walk is automatically the winner. And hopefully Redshift, I've heard Redshift is actually working on random walk subsurface, which I hope happens, because I think everybody out there is really wanting that.
But yeah, I mean, I guess what I was getting at by that is like, if you know that, okay, if I'm gonna make X scene and it just happens to be really quick and easy to get to that with this render engine versus this other render engine, you should probably use that. And that's why ultimately, I think we at MANVSMACHINE end up using all three, is because we can use each of them for their strengths. But that being said, generally speaking, at least Redshift and Arnold can do the same as all three of them. I think that was the most politically correct way to say that.
Yeah, no, I use those two, or those are my two main renderers of choice as well, because I think they complement each other very well, and they're both very production strong, and that's important to me and to people like you. But yeah, I mean, getting back to maybe something that they don't have yet that you wish they had. If you had to tell our listeners, viewers, what you wish Redshift had right now that you're missing, what would that be?
Oh, that's a toughie.
We can come back to it if you want.
No, it's all good. I think handling data with volumes is a particular weakness currently. Like, volumes overall. Well, it's a double-edged sword. So volumes actually look quite good in Redshift for certain types of volumes. Like clouds, for example, actually look quite nice in Redshift.
You have a chapter on when you cover that, right? Like so that you covered smoke, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, so I've got, like, if I remember correctly, I did like the thing everyone probably wants to see, which is fire and explosion, but also a very vapor-esque looking volume, like a cloud, and then also just like a super fantasy looking magical World of Warcraft type effect.
Yeah, you're a big World of Warcraft fan, right?
Well,
or you used to be.
Yeah, right? I used to lead a guild back in my days. That
That's
was a
awesome.
long time ago. Long time ago.
All right.
In a
All
galaxy
right.
far, far away. Yeah. Anyway, so sorry, I'm just coming to
You're
terms with I
you're
just said
you're
that
like thinking
publicly.
about that guild and the old days of, I don't know what you do in those things. You rampage, you pillage. I don't even know. I know
No.
nothing about that world.
Let's exit this subject as quickly and fluidly as possible.
All right.
Um,
All
right.
right.
So anyway, volumes. Let me just finish on volumes.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's a lot that you can't do with volumes still that I think I'd like to see. I think Redshift does a fantastic job for a lot of cases that, especially in the advertising industry, it can probably get a lot of the work done that you need to get done. There are quite a number of looks that you just can't achieve with it currently because of how their shaders are set up and what they evaluate. So an overhaul on volumes, I think, would be quite nice.
Great. Yeah. For me, I'm definitely, I don't do a ton of volumes, but I've just noticed that GPU renderers still sort of struggle with getting data from like that they struggle with that time to first pixel, where you're like getting all of your scene data, texture data off your computer and onto your GPU. I feel like they could all get faster in that. Sometimes I get a little frustrated with how long it takes it to start showing me something. But hey, man, that's the nature of the GPU beast, I guess.
Yeah, I have another addition to that list.
Oh
I'll be
boy.
brief. I can be
All
brief
right.
with it though. I
Don't burn
wanted
any
to
bridges.
say, yeah, we won't burn any bridges. I wanted to say, overall, maybe I'm going to burn bridges.
All
Stability.
right, we can just stop. That's fine. Well, stability is key to everything, right? I mean,
Right.
that's like without stability, nobody wants to use it, no matter how good it is.
Well, so here's
Yeah.
it's actually kind of a counterintuitive process, I think, that happens pretty often where, when you're setting up a farm or something like that, a lot of people will stack like 8 cards together in a machine and then have just a couple of those machines, right? So there's the points of failure are much fewer, which versus like if you had 50 nodes. The point of failure is much wider, or like there are less of them, or there are more opportunities.
For
you get
things
what
to
I'm saying,
go,
right?
yeah, just more things that can
So
break.
like, well, so right. So let's say you have 3 machines and they all have 8 GPUs, and for whatever reason, 2 of your machines are giving you trouble with stability on a GPU engine. That means you've got 2/3 of your farm that doesn't work right now, and you got to figure out why.
Oh,
You
man.
see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I when I was at DK, we had over 100 CPU nodes, and there'd always be a group that was acting up, like, oh, 110 through whatever are going down again, and we would just have to disclude, or what's the word in deadline? We'd have to
Blacklist.
basically blacklist. Thank you. We have to
Yeah, there you go.
blacklist those nodes, and which is totally fine when you have a lot of CPU nodes. But if you, like you said, that's a really good point. Like if you're GPU rendering locally and you're clustering 8 cards into a machine or 4 cards into a machine, that's like essentially you could lose half your farm if one thing starts to go wrong. Like that's
or
a
like if
really
you're
scary thing.
Yeah, if you're rendering overnight, and you've got 2 machines and they're both 8 GPU, and one of them starts failing on the job, for example, like a card's overheating and it can't finish its frame sequence or whatever, you're not going to know till the morning, and that's a big issue. It's just like, yeah.
That's just a fun.
It's similar. Think of it this way: it's similar to rendering out of After Effects an image sequence versus rendering an MOV file. How about that?
That's a really good analogy, because anytime I ever saw an artist when I was a CD, like rendering out a final sequence as an MOV, I would like slap them across the head. Be like, what are you doing? And they'd be like, what? And I'm like, okay, if any part of that fails, you have to start in the entire thing over. So for those of you that aren't familiar with that problem, if you render out, let's say, a 900 frame sequence to an MOV out of After Effects, it sounds like a good idea because you're going to have this one single file when it's all done. You'll be able to compress it, do whatever you need to do, and it's all good. Well, the problem is this. If it at any point becomes corrupt during that process, you've just thrown away all that time that it took to get to that point, and you have to do it all over again. Now, whereas what Trevor's saying is if you break this up into an image sequence, a sequence of targas, sequence of PNGs, whatever your flavor is, let's say it gets all the way to frame 880, and then it dies. Well, now you only have to render 881 to 900. You don't have to go all the way through that entire sequence again. And that is sort of the problem, I think, with GPU rendering in general, is that people are getting these like larger cluster machines, fewer of them. So there's a point of failure that gives you a high percentage rate of like, oh crap.
It's like a high risk factor.
Yeah, it's totally high risk. But anyway, that's a whole other talk.
It is.
I'm really happy that you took the time to chat. I'm glad we had you on this training course. We're really excited about it. Really excited to show everybody this new course. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for being on. And to everybody out there, I hope you check out the course. I hope you like it. And yeah, we'll see you out there. Trevor's often hanging around on our Slack, on the GSG Connect Slack. So if you're a GSG Connect member or a Greyscalegorilla customer, you have access to that Slack. You can come on over after you've taken the course and bug Trevor with your Redshift questions 24/7, right? You're available, right?
Sounds great. Yeah.
Just anything you want. I'm kidding. All right. Well, Trevor, thanks again. And so until next time, everybody, I'll see you around. Take care.